Thank you very much, Don, and welcome everyone to this, the fourth of our series of Provocations and Inspirations. May I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which the Union University and Schools Club stands, the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation. I'm really greatly honoured to welcome Ross Gittins to this series, and it is marvellous to have this series, which is jointly sponsored by the Royal Society and the Union University and Schools Club. Don has been absolutely central to creating the series, and it's very exciting to see it coming into its own now that we've got hot food. I think Professor Roy Green has been responsible for this overarching theme of productivity, and it's a pity that he can't be here, but I believe he's in Canberra, otherwise occupied. I arrived back from the UK at midnight last night, so excuse me if I'm a little blurry. But in fact, I've been following in England this much heralded and debated progress of the summit, and I'll be interested to hear what Ross has to say about it. He tells me that he's already written his remarks about today. So I imagine that many of you in this audience have been following Ross's writing for half a century, weekly, if not daily. Last year, the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald celebrated 50 years since he began at the papers in 1974. That's an extraordinary achievement in itself, but perhaps even more notable is that as an economics and generalist journalist, he's kept the respect of the academic community. I remember Jeff Harcourt being very positive about him on one occasion, and here we've got Robert Marks. He has managed to cover that tricky line between journalism and academia. I've had somewhat less opportunity to read Ross. I was based out of Australia and not in New South Wales for a lot of my life, but I've been hearing about him, in fact, all the time, and wherever I've been, Mexico, or the papers were always there. I'm not sure that calling anyone an institution is a compliment, but if it is, then Ross is one. Remarkably, Ross has been committed to ensuring that the next generation is economically literate. He teaches secondary school students, and his enormously widely read textbook has been really important. He runs master classes at Sydney University. His books are accessible, multitudinous, and wise. There are so many celebratory notices. I think it'd be blush to hear them all being repeated. But I think for us in the Royal Society, and he is a fellow of our Royal Society of New South Wales, the sense of engagement with the broader community across generations and across time has been very important. We, too, are trying to bring evidence, research-based thinking from a range of disciplines to the wider civic debate, to the civic public. Ross's honours, these are thick and fast. A Centenary Medal in 2001 for service to economic journalism, Member of the Order of Australia, 26th of January 2008 for service to journalism as a commentator on economic theory, policy and behavioural economics, and to the accountancy profession. A Doctorate of Letters, Honorary Doctorate of Letters from Macquarie University in 2011, from Sydney University in 2012. 2015, he was appointed as an eminent fellow in the practice of economics at the Research School of Economics at ANU, and in 2018, an honorary doctorate from ANU. Not only is he a member of our Royal Society of New South Wales, but he's a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia. And as he just mentioned at the table, he's also a fellow of the Chartered Accountants of Australia and New Zealand. And he tells me that he's now so old he doesn't even have to pay dues. Ross, we're incredibly grateful that you've found time in this week to join us today. It's a busy time for you, and we're looking forward to your remarks.
Well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to talk to the Royal Society today about the important topic of productivity, especially as you're well aware, it's turned out to be the first day of the economic Reform Summit in Canberra, which has really put our productivity crisis in the spotlight. I've been a media commentator on economics for about 50 years, as we've heard. In the first part of my career, I saw my role mainly as explaining to my readers the tenets of conventional economics and convincing them of the wisdom of those tenets. In more recent years, I've seen the need to serve my readers by casting a more critical eye over the conventional wisdom, which in my experience hasn't been particularly reliable guide to the betterment of our lives. So I'll start this talk by making sure you understand the dominant view, and then I'll point to various reservations and qualifications of mine before offering my thoughts on what we could be doing to help get productivity improving again. First, let's be clear on what productivity means. As with many of the technical terms economists use, they don't necessarily mean what ordinary people take them to mean. When economists say they want to increase productivity, they really mean they want to improve productivity. That's because productivity is not just a flash word for production. The economy's output of goods and services, which is the thing that gross domestic product measures. Productivity actually refers to the efficiency with which the economic machine takes economic resources, raw materials, physical capital and human labour, and turns them into the goods and services that we can produce and consume in our everyday lives. So, as economists never tire of explaining, calling for improved productivity is not a deceptive way of saying that everyone should work harder. Producing more by working harder increases production, but not productivity. As economists like to say, productivity is about working smarter, not harder. It's only by getting smarter that you can produce more without working harder. You, by which I mean the individual worker, the individual workplace, or the whole economy, you increase productivity by using the same quantity of economic resources to produce a greater quantity of goods and services than you did before. I'm sorry my voice is so croaky. Thank you. But to say that we haven't, without increasing the input of resources, we can increase what goes out the other end of the machine, seems like magic. How is it possible to get more goods and services without increasing the stuff that you put into the machine? Well, the short answer is by becoming more efficient in the way you turn inputs into outputs. In practice, the main thing we've done and have been doing every year since the Industrial Revolution is to give workers more and better tools and machines to work with. That's the key to all of it. It is, in fact, so by unceasingly investing more in labour-saving technology, so one worker can produce more widgets than they could before. That's the magic. Economists call this improving the productivity of labour. Labour productivity is usually measured as output per hour worked. Our workers' ability to produce more per hour has come mainly from advances in technology, machines that do better tricks. But other ways to improve productivity involve achieving a better educated and trained workforce, and also simply by thinking of better, more efficient ways to organise production in farms, mines, factories and offices and other buildings. That's the thing to remember. How productive we are depends on what's happening on the floor of all of those parts of the economy. It's not determined by Canberra. So next, why have we strived so hard to increase our productivity? And the answer is because it's been the main way we've increased our material standard of living over the past 200 years. The main way our lives have become healthier, better fed, more comfortably housed, with our work less physically demanding and more intellectually satisfying. Believe it or not, our striving for improved productivity has improved our standards of living a little bit almost every year for the past 200 years. So what's the problem? Why are we told that about a productivity crisis? Because for about the last decade, our productivity and hence our standard of living have stopped improving. That's the crisis. Some people want to say, well, we're actually going backwards. I don't think that's fair. It's fairer to say that we've stopped going forward. Consciously or unconsciously, we long ago got used to this steady improvement in our living standards. We got used to being able to spend a bit more every year. And we got used to believing that our children would lead more prosperous lives than we have, just as we've led more prosperous lives than our parents did. But this process of steady annual improvement hasn't happened for about a decade. Why? Is the cessation temporary or permanent? What happens when most people realise that their lives have stopped getting better? Wouldn't they get terribly dissatisfied and disillusioned and start voting for populist authoritarian leaders? Now that is the productivity crisis. So why has productivity stopped improving? The plain truth is that economists can't be certain why. Although economists certainly know more about how the economy works than the rest of us, they don't know as much as we imagine they do, and they like to give us the impression they do. So often, the best economists can do is give educated guesses, which I'll now tell you about because that's the best I can do. But first, remember this. Whereas the debate about productivity and what to do to improve it could leave you with the impression that productivity is itself a product of government policy, in truth, the nation's productivity is, as I've said, is determined mainly by the private sector on the floors of its many workplaces. Only when there's something going wrong on the floor do we wonder whether it's something the government's doing wrong with its taxes and regulations that's caused the problem, or whether some government incentive could be used to encourage businesses to do the good things that they're not doing. The most likely reason productivity has stopped improving is something we do know. Businesses haven't been investing as much as they used to in new tools and equipment for their workers. That's the one fact that stands out in the statistics, and that goes to the heart of how we have improved productivity for so long. This means that businesses haven't been taking advantage of recent advances in technology embedded in the latest models of the machines they use, thereby failing to increase their output per hour. The next question is why businesses have stopped bothering to increase the productivity of their workers. Well, for a start, it's because of what I call Sims law. As the former competition watchdog Rod Sims never tired of explaining, improving productivity is just one way a business can increase its profits. Naturally, businesses seek the easiest way to increase their profits, and improving productivity isn't one of them. One thing that can force businesses to use improved technology to reduce their costs per unit is price competition by rival firms. If your competitors are using better technology to lower their costs and want to take market share from you by lowering their prices, you better play the same game. But if that's not happening, then that's one reason why you might be tempted not to invest in the latest equipment, because there are easier ways to improve profits. But the more oligopolised industries become, that is, the more an industry is dominated by just a few big firms, the greater the degree of control those firms have over the prices that they're able to charge, and the more the big players can avoid competing on price. They compete for increased market share using advertising, product differentiation, non-compete clauses in employment contracts, and buying out pesky new entrants to the market. These are all ways of reducing competition. The competition that any economist will tell you will be the thing that would drive firms to put a lot more emphasis on improving the productivity of their workers by giving them better equipment to work with. Research by Treasury has shown increasing oligopolisation and a significant increase in price markups in recent years. All this suggests that businesses haven't spent as much on productivity enhancing new technology because the lack of competitive pressure has allowed them to increase their profits by other means, including higher price markups. But though reduced competition is probably the main reason for stable productivity, other structural factors are likely to have contributed. First, because mining is so capital intensive, the productivity of its labour is so many times higher or greater than it is in other industries. If you've got machines doing most of the work and not as many people there to keep an eye on the machines, then the productivity of labour is very high. So that means that even though mining is actually a fairly small part of the Australian economy, you wouldn't know it, but it is. Even though mining is not all that big, what happens in mining can have because its labour productivity is so high, can have a big effect on the national average. Mining moves to its own global cycle. Now that the China-related mining boom is long over, its productivity has actually been falling. We'll find out one day what that means, what caused that and why it's continuing or has stopped and turned around. But that's the story at present. As you would know, the share of our economy coming from the production of goods is declining, while the share coming from the production of services is increasing. But whereas the production of goods from farming, mining and manufacturing has become ever more capital intensive with higher labour productivity, the production of services such as health, education, hospitality and entertainment is labour intensive, making its labour less productive. So as a matter of arithmetic, the increase in the services share of the national production lowers the nation's overall labour productivity. But since the changed basket of goods and services is what we wanted to better meet our changing needs, we can't regard that as a bad thing. It's actually, the thing is that it's very easy to increase the productivity, the productivity of a machine, and much harder to increase the productivity of a person. So the more of our economy that comes from people, employing people to do things for us, rather than using machines to grow crops, to dig up minerals, or to make manufactured items, that means that there will inevitably be a slowdown in the rate of improvement in productivity, and that has already started to happening, and that's some part of the story. So, but the fact that we're now buying more services, paying for more services, and relative to what we pay for goods, is not a bad thing. That's happened because that's what we wanted. Nor is it something that we want to change. But it is a reason to expect that the rate of improvement in productivity to be smaller than it used to be. The expansion of the health and education services will add to our well-being, will add more to our well-being than would increased mining of coal and gas. So because we are producing the things that we need, more of the things that we need to improve our lives. If that has an effect on the rate at which productivity improves, that's unfortunate, but it's not the kind of thing we want to stop happening. Now that brings me to the second part of my talk, my reservations and qualifications in response to the conventional view that the pause in productivity improvement is a crisis that could destroy life as we know it. Well, the first thing to say is that man does not live by bread alone. It's important to remember that our productivity is important because it's the source of our material standard of living. Rising living standards are nice, and we could have trouble learning to live in a world where living standards stopped rising, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. There are lots of other dimensions of our lives that are just as important to our well-being. First and foremost is the quality of our human relationships. But we also have intellectual, emotional and spiritual needs to live a fulfilling life. For many of us, an important need is a job we enjoy. Productivity is just a means to an end. But remember, the economists who imply that it's an end in itself have a vested interest. And that vested interest is that that's the bit economists know. They measure the material side of our lives. They know a lot about how it works, and they give us plenty of free advice on how we can do better. But they are focused on the material aspect of life, which of course is important and unavoidable, and not bothering to put that in a broader context of other things that are important to us and other things that might be going wrong and more worrying than what's happening to productivity. Second point is, we're not Robinson Crusoe. With the exception of the US in recent days, all the rich economies are suffering similar pauses in productivity improvement, something those in panic mode often forget to mention. This suggests our problem is not simply something that we've stuffed up and could easily fix, but a more fundamental development or set of developments that may or may not be easy for all of us countries to fix. In future, all of the rich world may find our productivity improving more slowly for the same reasons. Those who worry most about the crisis may imagine, or want us to imagine, that we'll be left behind to grow relatively poorer as everyone else living standards continue to rise. By focusing on our problem and what we can do about it, and not understanding that everyone else has got the same problem, it's easy to overstate the extent of our problem. And if our standard of living isn't improving as rapidly as it used to, then that's true throughout the rich world. We'll all be in the same boat. The third point that I want to make is, remember the likelihood that productivity is being mismeasured. Especially when they talk to the public. Economists have a tendency to take the official figures at face value. But all of them know measurement can be dodgy. They know that some of the effects of advances in technology may benefit us in ways that aren't captured by the official figures, that benefit us in our private lives rather than our working lives. If it's not measured in GDP, economists won't be telling you about it. I know how much easier it is to check the meaning of a word or its spelling or the exact wording of some famous saying on Google rather than looking up dictionaries or books of quotations. I do that every day. And all of my dictionaries and quotations sit on the shelf unneeded anymore. Is that a benefit to my life? I think so. More seriously, some more deep thinking economists have noted that the standard way we measure GDP and its components was developed soon after World War II, when the big thing that had to be measured carefully was manufacturing in the rich countries I'm speaking of course. Deindustrialisation and other technological developments tell those more thoughtful economists the economies are very different to what it was back then, so we may not be measuring productivity accurately. Maybe it's actually doing better than we think. So you when you're dealing with accountants or economists, you always need to remember maybe their measurements aren't right. Fourth point, the present pause may be temporary. This wouldn't be the first time we'd worried about productivity improvement seeming to have ended, only to find it resumed. It's easy to think of reasons why productivity improvement won't be as strong in the future as it has been, but it's just as easy not to foresee some looming favourable development. It's usual for productivity to advance a little each year as a result of myriad modest improvements in workplaces around the nation. But improvement can also come in fits and starts. Occasionally, what economists call general purpose technologies occur, which over time have many applications and so give productivity a huge boost. Examples are electricity. Okay, we figured out electricity. How long did it take for us to exploit all the opportunities to improve our lives using electricity in 100 different ways? That's a general purpose technology. Another one is the internet and the information technology. It's possible that AI, or as it's called in my house, A1, by someone who doesn't know much about it, who will remain nameless, it's possible that artificial intelligence, and the other thing I like to say is, I can remember when AI standard for artificial insemination. It's possible that AI could be one of those general purpose technologies that, while it's still working its way through the economy, and it may take a long time to exploit all the opportunities that it offers, could have a big favourable effect on productivity. My fifth and final point of clarification, reservation, whatever you want to call it. The Nobel Prize winning economist Paul Krugman's endlessly, I'm a great admirer of Paul Krugman, by the way, but I get really pissed off every time I hear him quoted as having said that productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. Now, that's simply wrong. There's more to life than productivity and the higher material living standards it brings. To take an obvious example, should we fail to make the transition from fossil fuels to renewables before we reach the point of no return, as seems quite possible, that we're not actually getting on with reducing our emissions nearly as fast as we ought to if we want to be safe, then if that came to pass, the economic and social disruption that this would cause would utterly swamp worries about no future rises in the material standard of living. So let's keep this in context. Similarly, if we continue to destroy the natural environment the way we have been for the past 2 centuries, eventually we and our children and grandchildren will realise how foolish we've been and how hard it will be to recover our loss. That will loom in many people's lives as a bigger problem than the fact that our standard of living isn't getting any better. Our standard of living, when we look out the window, might not look too hot. Having said all that, the present worries about a pause in productivity improvement and the opportunity presented by today's economic reform roundtable have elicited many proposals to get things moving again. Some of those proposals are self-interested, rent-seeking, as economists say. Some are reforms that won't do much to improve productivity, but are worthwhile for other reasons. Some reforms may help productivity, but not by much. My best guess is that the main reason for the pause in productivity improvement is the fall off in business investment in labour-saving equipment. It's fallen off because the increased concentration of many industries, a few big companies increasing their dominance in their market, have made it easier for those businesses to increase their prices without bothering to invest in better technology. As well, the modest rise in wages hasn't motivated businesses to replace workers with machines and so as to save money. Why have businesses spent so much on better machines, labour-saving technology? Because humans have become so expensive. Their wages are higher because they're actually a reflection. Those wages are a reflection of our higher standard of living. In recent times, however, wages haven't been growing so rapidly that it worries the businesses. They might give you the impression they're terribly worried about everybody getting a 3% pay rise, but in fact, we have the cost of labour to our firms has not been growing strongly, and that is actually one of the great motivations why they invest in more labour-saving technology. That hasn't been happening, and so as I wrote yesterday, my best suggestion is for us to keep increasing wages in real terms, which to the Governor of the Reserve Bank is a horrifying idea. My suggestion is that we do the opposite of what a banker would do, certainly a central banker, and that is keep the lid on wages. I'm saying we should increase them strongly. That would increase the incentive for businesses to do what they have done many times before but haven't been doing lately, and that is invest in labour-saving equipment and improve our productivity that way. And by the way, there is, as I was saying in the paper yesterday, there is a secondary benefit of giving the workers decent pay rises, and that is the workers turn out to be customers. And if you put more money in their pocket, the chances are that they'll spend a bit more in your shop. So that's another part of what I think we can do to improve productivity. And of course, the thing is, if you get, it's actually reversing the direction of causation. You put up prices by more, you put up wages by more, and the governor of the Reserve Bank and every economist will tell you what, if you're not getting improved productivity, you shouldn't be increasing wages by any more than prices are going up. I'm saying let's do it the other way. Let's put them up and let's give business a reason to get back into the business of improving our productivity, and that will justify the wage rises retrospectively. It's a frightening thought for most bankers and economists, but I think it's a good idea. Thank you very much.
I'd love to ask Ross the first dozen questions, but I think that would be abuse of power. So I'll hand over to the audience.
Thank you, Ross. I'm Roz, and a really interesting talk. I'm fascinated by the international dynamic in all of this. I mean, the word of the month is not just the economic summit, but it's also tariffs. So I was interested in how all of the manipulation of tariffs by a big economy like the US, what kind of impact is that having on us, and also how will that play out in the conversations in Canberra this week?
I think we've worked out that so far we don't look to be greatly affected by Trump and his tariffs. The truth is, the surprising truth is that we don't have much trade with America. Any effect that Trump has on us will come via China, because that is our big trading partner. And by the way, China is the biggest trading partner of just about every country in East Asia. So it does seem as if a fair bit of what Trump started out saying he was going to do was just bargaining. And people are thinking, well, it's not going to be good for the economy, but and it's not going to be good for America itself. It's a crazy thing for the Americans to do. Any economist will tell you that. But what will happen is that people who could have sold things to America find other places to sell them. And it's even possible that we'll gain some kind of benefit from it all. But what will happen is that fewer people will be trading with America. And Americans will be paying more tax. It's called a tariff. And I was talking to a famous economist today, I knew the other day. He said, look, the way you've got to think about all this tariff stuff is that it's a way of helping to balance America's budget. Because it is a tax. It is paid by the people who buy the imported goods. And it will help a bit to reduce America's big budget deficit. So we're still working it out. It doesn't sound like it's disastrous, but it is it's still, it's all up to negative, but it's not as bad as we thought, we hope.
Thanks, Tom. Ross, Trevor Bird's my name. I was very interested in your comment about competition, and just knowing from my earlier basic economics is that the economy, you're assuming that there are lots of people competing. Yes, you do get where they might only have one or two industries, but basically your economy might be dominated by many. So one of the big issues, of course, is if our competition is going down. Is that your suggestion about increasing wages may be one way of changing that? But how is that often measured? The fact that our competition is not as good. Yes, we can see some things like Woolies and so on being dominant in the market, but I guess it's the same in the mining industry too. So,
yeah.
one of the big issues about competition is how you might increase it, so to speak.
Yes. Well, there's a sense in which the horse is bolted. We have gone for too many years not policing proposals for mergers and companies in the same business to a big company in the same industry buying out a small company. The ACCC hasn't had the powers that it should have had, and that's improved. And one of the things that we have been doing, which will help a bit, is this move against non-compete clauses in people's contracts, which when you think about it is a very strange idea. The argument is this person knows all my secrets, and they know how to run a successful tomato shop, and they might set up in opposition to me, and I've got to make them promise that they don't take all their knowledge that they've got from me over the road and work for my competitors or set up in competition with me. If you really do have highly paid people who do know a lot of important things that other people don't, maybe there's a case for non-compete clauses. But really, when you apply them to people in ordinary circumstances, which has been happening, then you're really just hurting the person who signs that agreement, because you're limiting their ability to move to another employer who's offering them more money. And so that is and so that's very anti-competitive, and it's felt by the individuals who are obliged to sign these contracts with these clauses if they want to get the job with you. The government has stopped that, but mainly for people towards the bottom, not people at the very top. Now that will stop that getting worse, but it won't undo what's happened. And the other thing is that if you really wanted to undo what the economists call the concentration of industries, so many of our industries that are just dominated by two, maybe in the case of banking, four. And you know that if the government said to those four banks, it's okay, you do what you like, we'd be down to two banks in no time. So you really have, because it's in the short-term interests of the firms to do that. It's not in the interests of their customers or the economy more broadly. So if it's true, and this research comes from Treasury and the Reserve Bank, so presumably they think it's pretty sound and solid. It looks it. then what that really says is if we've allowed too much industry concentration, which reduces competition and gives firms more power over what prices they can charge, then we've missed the bus. And the answer to that is to go to these big firms and force them to break up. No, the National Party says that they'd like to see that, especially with Woolworths and Coles. Well, a lot of us might like to see that, but I think the politician with a chance of being in power who wants to get stuck into Woolworths and Coles and a few others, I think that guy has yet, or woman has yet to come along.
Thank you. Ross, I was particularly interested in your description of AI, Linwood, as a general tech, like electricity. And my daughter has been placed in charge of introduction of AI in a UK bank. And I'm sure a lot of people are concerned when they hear something like that and they think the people are going to be out of jobs. The real message is, according to productivity, it's going to enhance your jobs. But how do you cope with the message that's coming out about people losing their jobs with AI, which it should be a positive message, but that comes out very negatively?
Well, yes. I don't know how you cope with that. People will always have that fear. And you can say, well, it hasn't happened in all the things in the past, but maybe it will happen this time. So it's hard to say, no, those fears are utterly unwarranted. But what's happened in the past is that people have adjusted. And you see, I thought of this when I was writing my speech, and I kept praising labour-saving investment in labour-saving equipment. Now, if you've not been educated by an economist, you might think, oh, that sounds bad, everyone's going to lose their job. Well, let me just say that businesses have been investing in labour-saving equipment, trying to reduce the number of people they have to employ, flat out since the Industrial Revolution. And so far, we're up to an unemployment rate of 4%. So there has to be something else going on. And what goes on is that by increasing our ability to produce more cheaply, that actually leaves all the rest of us, people who are not employed in that industry, better off. And so the process as it's happened over those years has been one that's allowed people to spend more on other things. And that's where the jobs have come. That's one of the reasons why we now have a much higher proportion of women working in the labour force than we did when I left school many years ago. And that's because the real cost of manufactured goods went down, which means that all of us are richer. We can buy those things for less. And that increase in our real incomes was able to be spent in other areas and in the services sector. And that's one of the reasons why it was good to have all those women who were sitting at home thinking, I wouldn't mind having a job, because that's what happened. So what I'm saying is this has not been a problem with other technological improvements in the past. What I can't promise you is that AI won't sweep through the economy at a faster rate than the rest of the economy can adjust to. It hasn't happened in the past, or if it did, it was just periods where people were displaced, as economists say, and took a while to find a job somewhere else. That's what has happened in the past. I can't guarantee that that's what will happen with AI.
Ross, over this way. Sorry. Ross, I was waiting to hear your ideas of how we could improve productivity, and it came to me as some surprise, as the worst economist in the room, that we increase wages. So I looked around, and looking around, there's not too many people here who are going to have their wages increased. Most of us. But the first thing that struck me was that would just move everything offshore. And if that happened, and wages being cheaper and technology perhaps being reasonable offshore, is that going to put a pressure back on this country to improve productivity, to compete with the movement of work offshore?
Look, I wouldn't be certain about that. You can't, services delivered by humans, people who look after young children in childcare centres, people who look after old children, old people, no one represented in this room. You can't move that offshore. So the more of the economy what we're paying for is services, human services. Some of that can be moved offshore. If you're just talking about sort of, if you're just talking about processing my expense claims at work, you can get that done in India, and that's a service, and it is done in India, and they have a lot of trouble with my expenses. But a lot of those services have to be delivered on location by a well-educated Australian person, so that's not going to go offshore. And the more, what's already gone offshore is most of our manufacturing. Now that's actually left us better off, because they can produce manufactured goods cheaper than we can. And that's true of all the developed economies. All of them have benefited from being able to buy cheap manufactured goods produced in somewhere in Asia, or somewhere where wages are low. So that has happened at the expense of people who are working in the industry, in the domestic industry, being heavily protected by tariffs. Now, when we cut our tariffs and stopped artificially protecting our manufacturing sector, it went down, and fortunately most of the people who lost their jobs, not all of them but many of them, were elderly or older, and they didn't have to worry. The problem was solved. But we had that problem, and but that's mainly an adjustment problem. And that's what I'm saying about AI. I don't know whether it's going to give us a big adjustment problem. But just see, what I was proposing was a scheme where you increased wages in expectation that that would lead to a process that justified those wage rises. That's why I said it's looking at the process the opposite way to the way the Reserve Bank governor looks at it. She says if you haven't, and all of business says, if we're not getting more productivity, then no one should get a real pay rise. And that is the kind of old way of thinking about it. What I'm saying is quite radical, which is to say, how about we turn it around, put the wages up first, and see if that leads to increased productivity. And the way you go about it, you can't force private businesses to pay their workers more than they want to, except that you can affect norms of behaviour. So the way governments would do this is to give all of their workers a decent pay rise, and say that everyone in the private sector should do so too. And the more people do that, the more it happens. And it happens because it becomes a norm. And if I don't increase my workers' pay by 3% rather than 2%, I might lose them. They might go to work for some terrible employer who's offering them more. So that's how that would do. Now, it is a radical idea, but I have been encouraged to push this line of thinking by some people who are fairly high up. I'm not saying they told me to say it, so I'm saying it. I'm saying they got onto me and said, sounds like a good idea to me, Ross. Why don't you give it another run? Which I did. Sorry.
Got a question here?
Mm-hmm. Got a question?
Hi, Ross. The Reserve Bank apparently has cut its assumed measure of productivity growth, and if she's been accurately reported, which is often questionable, the governor has said, well, there's nothing we can do, i.e. the bank, there's nothing the bank can do about that. Do you have a comment?
Yes. This is the government. The Reserve Bank makes forecasts for the growth of the economy this year, next year, maybe 3 years. And they do that using an assumption about what will happen to productivity. This is part of what I've been saying about how they don't actually know all that much about it. And so they just pick a number. It's based on an average of what it used to be the past years. If it's been coming down, then maybe we cut it down, which is what's going on. But it's just a number that they plug into their forecasts. It's not a measure of what has actually happened. That's the first point. The other point was I did take the governor to task for saying that there's nothing we could do about, the bank could do about productivity. That's kind of technically true, but what I was saying is that that proposal that I just floated they're going around saying that would be madness. And I'm saying, we've got a problem, why don't we have another think? Technically, the governor is right. She doesn't set productivity or even do anything much that affects productivity. That's true. Because productivity, as I keep saying, is set in every workplace in Australia, added together. That's what will produce the number. And then you can argue about if we change this policy or that policy, would it have an effect? That would not be something that is coming out of the Reserve Bank.
Yes, Ross, John Connor, I'm over here on this side. Thanks very much. That was a really, really good address. But a couple of issues. One, in terms of competition. There's the usual reference, you made the usual reference to the retailers having some insight into what some of them are actually doing and have done in terms of investment in productivity internally. I think that might use some further examination. In the case of mining, I simply don't understand it. It is the most cutthroat industry in the world because it's a global industry in terms of requisite for increased productivity in real terms. But a couple of areas that are not usually mentioned that relate to productivity. One is government. A significant proportion of our economy is government. And we seem to have little to substitute for competition in terms of trying to compel improvement in productivity in that area. And the second would be some areas of our economy where the lack of productivity has another source. The principal one would be the building industry, where a significant part of the lack of productivity is due to the extraordinary conduct which has long been tolerated of one particular union, sometimes in collaboration with their employers. Could you comment on all of that?
Yes, I think I know the union you mean. And I hope they're doing something about it. But I've long believed that, especially in construction, if unions are doing bad things, it could well be the case that some employers are saying, fair enough, where do I sign? And you've got to ask yourself, if the CFMEU has been so bad for so long, how come all the Liberal governments we've had haven't done anything about it? My answer is because the big firms in that industry did not encourage the government to do something about it. There are other parts of what you were talking about that I thought of something to say, but I've lost it.
Sorry, Ross, it's usually impolite to correct the guest, but the New South Wales government did do a Building Industry Royal Commission in this state, and it did significantly change the industry. I don't think government's been absolutely idle on that front, but inconsistent, I'd agree. But I'm going to ask you a question which is going to probably inflame you. The very self-satisfied name Productivity Commission is an interesting institution. And since the 1950s, we now have government now consumes twice the money as a percentage of our economy than it used to run our services. To what extent does the Productivity Commission's work, which is pretty reliably said that when government gets into something, they make it less efficient, that you get less for your dollar, is that an anchor and a burden on improving our national productivity now?
I don't think it is, and you remind me of what the earlier questioner was mentioning. What can you do about increasing efficiency, productivity in the public sector? Well, some old Treasury guy would say, we have this thing called the, I forget what they call it, but they reduce everybody's efficiency dividend, yes. So they have an efficiency, all governments have had these things where we automatically cut your money by 2% because you will have got more efficient by 2%. That just means that they've shown a lot of public servants with a lot of knowledge about what their department was actually doing out the door. So that was a device that was intended to provide, that was a stick that was intended to make public government departments and government-owned agencies get more efficient. I don't think it's worked very well, but it is an important thing that we do need to ensure that the work that government agencies do is done fairly effectively without just a lot more people than they need. But there isn't it's hard to think of some magic answer to that, but it's certainly true that we need to be watching that. What I also think is don't forget that we have the lowest level of taxation in the OECD. I think we might be only a fraction higher than the Americans, but far less than the OECD average. So we're not, everybody likes to believe that we're a highly taxed country. It is not true. We're actually at the other end. So that says we must be doing something okay, but it's certainly true that we don't want governments wasting money. And there could be a lot more effort on that. One of my lines, which I'm saving up for some future column, is that Treasury, people like Treasury and Productivity Commission have worried too much about, especially Treasury, about getting smaller government, when I think what they should have been doing is working on getting better government. That's what we need. And what we need is people in the coordinating departments, Treasury, the Department of the Prime Minister and so on, building up a huge knowledge of what works and what doesn't, and creating an environment where studies of the effectiveness of various government policies are done regularly, and when they say that they are not effective, we do something about it. And that's not what we've been doing. And Treasury has not made itself the place you go to when you want to find out whether a policy like that is likely to work or not work. So in other words, we could have been doing a lot more in a broad sense to increase the productivity of the public sector than we have been, and we need to. But it won't be through market mechanisms, because the public sector is outside the market.
Thanks, Ross. We've reached 2 o'clock, and we said that we would wrap up by about 2. So if I could hand over to Lindsay Botten, our Vice President, who will give a vote of thanks.
Could I begin by thanking Don Hector for putting together such a wonderful series and this particular event. And thank you, Ross, very much for your time and the insightful presentation and discussion today. Thank you. You've demonstrated to us why you are indeed an institution in economic journalism, living up to your mantra of serve the reader, educating people, growing understanding with clarity and wit in the public interest and in common language that everyone can hope to understand. Thank you for your insights into productivity, your ability to explain an important and somewhat dry field in everyday terms, and perhaps in ways that also challenge the economic and financial orthodoxy. Quite exemplified by your column in yesterday's Herald, encompassing the need for increased competition and defying the monofocus of the Reserve Bank and urging us the adoption of a growth mindset. Those of us here today and many, many thousands of your readers are grateful that you found your way to become, as you described, the square peg in the square hole and to find your perfect job at the Sydney Morning Herald some 50 years ago. Over that time, with well over 5,000 columns written at least 3 times a week, you've become a must-read for innumerable people who want to understand their world that little bit better. We are delighted that you're amongst the Royal Society of New South Wales Fellowship. We appreciate your time and expertise greatly today, and we look forward to many years of compulsory reading of your columns in the Herald. Thank you again, Ross, and with that, please accept this book, which is on the early history of the Royal Society of New South Wales as a small token of our appreciation.